Industrial gray lockers ringed its hallways, the compartments narrow enough to repel most of your textbooks, but wide enough to collect the trash and detritus from your backpack. It was your own personal landfill. Linoleum floors, classrooms with chaebol, the combo chair tables of the 70s, blackboards, American flags, loudspeakers from which the wah 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 of adult speak would drone. Our school district was so large that the juniors and seniors had their own separate high school, the so-called senior high school, and the freshmen and sophomores had their own underclassmen high school building. Carlisle High School stocked its seats and bleachers with a familiar cast from the 80s, the athletes who towered above the rest of us, the cheerleaders who lay supine beneath them, the geeks with their physics books under their arms, the preps with their tree-torns, swatches, and impeccable Benetton sweaters. A handful of black kids with MC Hammer pants and tall square afros, tightly faded. Punks and skaters with their leather jackets and black Converse. A few swirly hippies. The rednecks with their oily palms and cigarettes and trucks. Carlisle High School was another cultural cul-de-sac built with the craftsman blueprint of John Hughes, the Frank Lloyd Wright of teen malaise. Overwhelmingly white, Carlisle's population offered all the rainbows of Caucasia. The town's main employers were Dickinson College, the Army War College, a smoky stack of factories, and the service industries that had sprung up to support the aforementioned trifecta. In the spirit of public education, we progeny were all in the mix together. The itinerant army brats, the ivory sons and daughters of professors, doctors, and lawyers, the greasy offspring of waiters, cooks, and factory workers, and the token refugee family. The Tran family blended right into the mix like proverbial flies in the ointment. That is to say, we didn't. Carlisle's glitter was unmistakably 80s, but its structure was straight from the post-war era, bricked together by the mortar of the 50s. We had a downtown Woolworths with a chrome luncheonette counter and red vinyl stools and a grand movie theater with its incandescent marquee. The four corners of Carlisle's town square were righted by 2 courthouses and 2 churches, Episcopalian and Presbyterian, God and law and God. It wasn't a subtle message to any of us living in Carlisle what was at the heart of our town. And the pièce de résistance, our high school was the town's designated Cold War fallout shelter. The blue and yellow radiation placards festooned our hallways, reminding us that we were only a button push away from nuclear annihilation. From what I gleaned on television, Carlisle seemed like a slice of American pie a la mode. We bottled lightning bugs on summer nights, trucks flew Confederate flags, we loitered at 7-Elevens and truck stops, we shopped at flea markets and shot pellet guns. My high school provided a daycare for girls who had gotten pregnant but were still attending classes. We stirred up marching band pride and fomented football rivalries. The auto shop kids rattled by in muscle cars and smoked in ashen cobbles before the first period bell. We were rural royalty, Dairy Queens and Burger Kings. So I'm going to pass it over to Quay Mai now, who will read.
Thank you so much for the beautiful reading. Actually, I listened to the audiobook of Saigon read by Phuc, and I was like, you know, he can become an audiobook narrator because he has such a wonderful voice, and you are so talented, you know, listening to your body, like you can do so many things. First, I would like to say that I am so honored to be here. Because I grew up in Vietnam and I'm still a Vietnamese national, and I didn't leave Vietnam for the first time when I was 20 years old. So you know, I'm still very Vietnamese, and it has been my dream to have a reading with an author who has left Vietnam, who, you know, who's Vietnamese but lives outside Vietnam, because the war really divided us, and I wanted literature to bring us together. And I think this event today is so important to me, and it's very emotional for me. And I want to thank Phuc for inviting me to be on this program, and thank you, Green Apple Book. So my So my novel, The Mountain Sing, was published in March this year. And, you know, I started writing in Vietnamese, and this is my first book in English. And the novel is told in the voices of Grandma Diệu Lan and her granddaughter Hương. And Grandma Diệu Lan calls her granddaughter a guava because Hương means fragrance. But she's superstitious, so she believes that there are evil spirits hover above the earth looking for beautiful children to kidnap. So that's why, you know, the older generation of Vietnam call the kids, you know, very ugly names to avoid them from being kidnapped by evil spirits. So I'm going to give you a taste of my novel by reading a part from Grandma Diệu Lan's voice. This is the first time we hear from her. And the chapter is called The Fortune Teller. Nghệ An province, 1930. So Grandma Diệu Lan tells Hương about what happens to her family. And this is the first part of the story. Guava, remember how we used to wander around the old quarter of Hanoi? We often stopped in front of a house on Hàng Gai. I didn't know anyone who lived there on Silk Street, but we stood in front of a house, peering through its gate. Remember how beautiful everything was? Wooden doors featured exquisite carvings of flowers and birds. Lacquered shutters gleamed under the sun, and ceramic dragons soared atop the ribbed curving edges. The house was a traditional namzan with 5 wooden sections, remember? And there was a front yard paved with red bricks. Now I can tell you the reasons I lingered in front of that house. It looks just like my childhood home in Nghệ An. As I stood there with you, I could almost hear the happy chatter of my parents, my brother Công and Auntie Tu. Ah, you asked me why I never mentioned to you about having a brother and an aunt. I'll tell you about them soon, but don't you want to visit my childhood home first? To go there, you and I will need to travel 300 kilometers from Hanoi. We follow the national highway, passing Nam Định, Ninh Bình, and Thanh Hóa provinces. Then we turn left at a pagoda called Phu Định, crossing several communes before arriving at Vĩnh Phúc, a village in the north of Vietnam. The name of this village is special, Guava, as it means forever blessed. At Vĩnh Phúc, anyone will gladly show you to the gate of our ancestors' home, the Chan's family's house. They walk with you along the village road, passing a pagoda with the ends of its roof curving like the fingers of a splendid dancer, passing ponds where children and buffaloes splash around. During summer, you gasp at clouds of purple flowers blooming on swan trees and at red gout flowers sailing through the air like burning boats. During the rice harvest season, the village road will spread out its golden carpet of straws to welcome you. In the middle of the village, you arrive in front of a large estate surrounded by a garden filled with fruit trees. Peeking through the gate, you see a house similar to the one we saw on Silk Street, only more charming and much larger. The people who take you there will ask whether you are related to the Chan family. If you tell them the truth, Guava, they'll be astonished. The Chan family's members have either died, been killed, or disappeared. You learn that 7 families have occupied this building since Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Grandma. Do you want to, that was beautiful. That was really I was really struck by the epic sort of expanse of your novel, and it had things in there that I had never read about before, the Great Famine and the land reform, and it reminded me a lot of when the first time I read Junot Diaz's novel, The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, and I learned about sort of the history of the Dominican Republic in a way that on a deeply personal level. So I was really moved by your book so much, and learned things about Vietnam that I didn't know.
Thank you so much.
Do you want to? Can I ask you my first question since you read?
Sure.
So I'm just reading off my phone here. So without spoiling the book for people who haven't read it, there's a really strong theme in your book about of reconciliation, both coming to terms with the past on a national and personal or familial level. What do you think had to happen for your characters to reconcile, especially for characters who had to bear terrible atrocities? And how do you think reconciliation is able to happen?
Thank you for the important but difficult question, right? Vietnamese people have gone through a lot, and a lot of our pain, has been inflicted on each other. We had different wars and conflicts within Vietnam, and in the Vietnam War, for example, many families had members fighting against each other, and to reconcile and to forgive each other after the war is very important for the families to move on. Otherwise, the trauma will be passed on the next generation. So that's why I wrote this book, like you said, with the message of reconciliation. And that's really, really difficult. I think to reconcile, people have to look at the stories of the other side, understand the points of view of the other side, so as to have some empathy, so for reconciliation to happen, I think there should be some willingness to talk, to discuss, to open up, to explain the reasons for different actions. Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up question? I find I love that. It's so powerful, and it's so hard. It's so hard. I sent you a second question, but it's about the idea of forgiveness. Like, I think, forgiveness in your book, it feels like a superpower. Like, it's amazing to me that your characters are able to find forgiveness. And I'm wondering how you see, what is the relationship between forgiveness and the desire to forgive someone, and also the desire to see justice, right, and to see accountability. I think, and I think about sort of the United States, and I'll think specifically about the civil rights movement, and the idea that forgiveness comes from the people who are oppressed, or the people who have been victimized, I think, right? So there's this idea that I have to forgive, or a person needs to forgive the oppressor. And then I think there's also this idea that we also want to see justice and equity happen. And I'm not saying that the idea of forgiveness and the idea of justice are opposite ideas, but they certainly feel like it feels to me like there's a tension there. So like, even in the idea of the history of Vietnam, who's in the position of forgiving, and what needs to happen for forgiveness to happen? And also there's this idea of justice too, right? Sorry for the long question.
And very important and difficult questions to answer. I think the Mountain Sing is built on the foundation, the principles of Buddhism. So with Buddhism, Grandma Diệu Lan, who's a Buddhist, tells her family members, if you bear grudges, you are the ones who have to bear the burden of sorrow. So, she did not forgive her enemy who killed her father, who killed her mother for a long, long time. But in the end, if she did not forgive, her granddaughter would suffer. So that's why she decided to forgive. And it took her a long time to come to that decision. And I think she also believes that heaven has eyes. You know, there's Vietnamese proverbs that say heaven has eyes, or cruelty dispense, cruelty return. So whoever has bad deeds, they have to suffer, if not by under the law, then by their conscience, or by the things that will come upon them. In the novel, there's also a Vietnamese proverb, gieo gió gặt bão, uh, those who sow the wind will reap the storm. Yeah. So there's a lot of Vietnamese traditions, Vietnamese thinking inside the book. And I think why I touch on the principle of forgiveness is that my own grandma was killed in the Great Hunger. So in the Great Hunger of Vietnam, if the audience don't know yet about it, it's a catastrophe that took place during World War II, and around 2 million Vietnamese died from the Great Hunger, and it's rarely documented in fiction in English. So I felt the need to write about it. And also another reason is that 3 of my family members died in that Great Hunger. And my grandma was taking care of her little children, and they were so hungry and there was no food. So she ventured into a cornfield, and the guard of that cornfield caught her and tied her to the corn plants. So she was too weak to break away. So my father told me the story about the man who had killed her, and he had moved to the south. And I wish so many bad things on him. So as I started this book, I created a character, in this novel who's so evil. But in the end, actually, when I wrote about him, I searched into my emotion and I found forgiveness, because I wanted to let go of all my anger, because I think keeping an anger inside of us will be unhealthy for us. And hopefully the law will punish him, and also nature, God, heaven will punish him. So you have asked me 2 questions, so now it's your turn.
Okay. Okay.
Tell everyone that Saigon is one of the best books I've read in recent years, and it's one of my favorite memoirs. I mean, it kept me so interested throughout. There was not a section where I felt it's unrelated or uninteresting. I'm so thankful for Phuc, who wrote this memoir with such honesty. He's so talented. I mean, he's a poet, his talent for using words is just incredible. And it's so, because he's so well read and he's so thoughtful, so it shines on each page. So I celebrated his talent. I laughed out loud because it's humorous, but also I cried quite a few times because it's so painful. So I want to ask Phuc, because I'm not sure I can ever write a memoir, because writing a memoir is to dig deep inside your own your pain and bring it out to the surface, and somehow the world witness it, and you have to experience it again when you read it. So were you parts that you censor yourself? You said, this is too much, I don't want to write about it, or it will offend those I love?
That's a great question. I was worried about it, but in a strange way, it's a gift for the writing process that I don't have a very close relationship with my parents. So I'm very close with my brother, and I speak with my parents, but I think I've broke my parents' hearts so many times now. As a teenager, if you read the book, you'll see I'm not a great son, and I own that. So I think it was a strange gift to be able to write the book, and not to worry. Obviously I think about them, and I didn't want to write anything. I didn't go out of my way to try to write anything that seemed unnecessary or cruel, but I also felt that I needed to write as authentically as possible about everything in our family, as far as it related to me and how it affected me. So, but I thought about it, but on my writing notebook, I had a little note to myself, and it said, whatever I was afraid to write the most, that was the thing that I had to write. And so that helped me be
Principle.
honest. Yeah.
Your brother Luke is just amazing, and I think he just had a Instagram conversation with you
You did.
on
Yeah. He's great.
Instagram, right? I'm so glad he was there with you. But please don't say you were a bad son. You were a brilliant person. I think each of us had to live our own life and deal with the situation. You made the most out of your situation. You should be so proud because you overcame so many challenges and become who you are today, a celebrated artist. So I also want to ask, your parents displayed symptoms of trauma. They were physically, your father, he was violent towards you. He also, detached himself from you. He didn't come close to you, and that's a symptom of trauma. So what did your parents go through that that caused such
Yeah, I mean, I think, my father was a successful lawyer in Saigon, and, so just leaving in 1975, losing your entire country, they had to abandon, my father had to abandon his family, his entire, his brothers and sisters and his parents. I mean, they came to this country, with a little baby and no English, and so I think all of that seemed very terrible. And then on top of that, my father also suffered, quite a bit of physical abuse in his family. Um, and I think the challenge for them was that I don't know if they really understood how to deal with it. I think, you know, what I've read is that I think at least right now in Asian American cultures, I don't know about in Vietnam, but the idea of going to counseling or therapy or treating your mental health it's just not common. And
yeah.
is it common in Vietnam, or is it?
Actually, people who display trauma, symptoms of trauma, are considered, crazy, insane, or possessed by ghosts.
Yeah, yeah,
So so it's very difficult for Vietnamese, our parents' generation to deal with trauma because they don't want to talk about it, especially for men. They could say, if I show that I'm traumatized, then it's character of like being feminine, being female, being weak. So that's why they try to bury their trauma, and it makes it very, a lot worse.
yeah. And I love that you said that. I think, last year there was a great documentary on PBS. Well, I mean, I think it was pretty good. I mean, by Ken Burns about the Vietnam War. And he was interviewing people. Did you see it, Quay Mai?
Yes, yes, I love that
Yeah,
documentary.
I thought it was very good. And I remember texting my dad saying, I think this is really good. I think you should watch it. And my dad said, no way, he would never watch it. And he said, why do you want me to relive the most horrible events of my life? You know? And, I was thinking, oh, because it might be helpful, or you might heal from it or learn. It's very painful for them to talk about. And I think the ways that they dealt with trauma just weren't healthy, and I think it's also maybe, I think it's generational, also very much cultural, like my being so Americanized.
Mm-hmm. So that's why I talk about reconciliation inside my book, because I think within the Vietnamese community, there's still a lot of division, a lot of pain. So if there's no sufficient healing and reconciliation, the trauma will be passed on to the next generation, and people are not thinking about it, out loud, but actually it's really happening. And I think, the war has happened, the war ended 45 years ago, and people still live with those memories, and it's still very bad. So, I just want to say that, when I was growing up in Vietnam, I grew up in a small town, Bạc Liêu. This is the place where a lot of people fled by boat. to the United States or other countries. So we were worried about them. But I myself, I was worried about those who fled and whether, they could encounter, like risk, while doing at sea. But my friends and I were very jealous of people like you who made it, to the US or Canada or Australia. And actually, in the in the early 90s, where Việt Kiều, like overseas Vietnamese like you, came back, like normally they well dressed and they look very well nourished, and we were very jealous of them. So we always considered people like you very privileged compared to us, because we lived for a long time under the embargo, hungry all the time. And so do you consider yourself, I mean, do you have relatives in Vietnam still? Do they consider yourself being privileged? And do you think you are privileged compared to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, I just have distant cousins, like my father. Like, I think everybody who is directly related to us, my father, his aunts, my aunts, his sisters, everyone left. They're all either in the U.S. Or Australia or France. No, I absolutely, I am very privileged. I'm very lucky. But I think that there is not a connection between, wealth and happiness. So I think even though, obviously I grew up in, the wealthiest country in the world, I look around my high school classmates and, there were kids who were incredibly unhappy. So and maybe that's even worse, right? To wonder why you live in the United States and you're miserable, right? And what does that mean? It's funny because I read this funny survey maybe 10 years ago now, so maybe the data is out of date, but it said that the people in Vietnam were some of the happiest people in the world. And I don't know what the metrics are, but it was an interesting poll. And I thought, well, that's interesting that there doesn't seem to be a correlation or a connection between, your GDP and the relative happiness of the people. So
Yeah, and actually, like I live and work in big cities, and compared to the countryside of Vietnam, the people in the big city like Hanoi and Saigon are more stressed. I remember, I took a friend to Phuc Tran village, a ceramic making village, in the outskirts of Hanoi, and then my friend from the Netherlands told me he has never seen people so happy eating lunch, because we passed a group of women workers who were sitting on the ground, having lunch from their lunch boxes, and they were laughing. And and then he said in the Netherlands people are so stressed, and he has never seen people laughing so much. So you are right in saying that happiness doesn't correct, doesn't relate directly with wealth. Wealth is the emotional well-being. I think your privilege being that you could have such good access to literature. I was reading the book, I was so jealous, because you could have access to such a big library. You could borrow so many books. When I was growing up, we had no library in the town where I was. And I had to look for people with books to borrow from them. But let's not compare. I just want to say that your book is just so amazing. And you deal with so many important topics in your book. The theme of identity, how to find your own place in a society which refused to accept you at first, right? So I'm sorry that your parents and you face a lot of racism. So how do you think racism has changed in America? Has it gotten better? And what could we do to fight against racism?
Gosh, I think I think having stories like yours and mine, being able to tell a story that will open up people's horizons and deepen their empathy, I think is really important. I think there is an important amount of accountability that I think that the United States needs to reckon with in terms of its racial history. I think that's really important, and making sure that everyone has the same opportunities, and think, boy, it's loaded. I'm just a tattooer and maybe a writer. I don't know if I can answer what we can do to fix racism in the United States.
You
But
wrote about it so well in the book. Yeah.
thanks. I mean, and I think all I could, thank you.
Yeah.
I think all I can do is talk about my experience and be authentic to it and be true to it.
Yes.
Thank you. You've asked me 3 questions now, so I think, can I ask you a question about Mountain Sings? Will your book be published in Vietnam?
Mm-hmm.
And like, how do you think it will be received? Yeah.
So publishing in Vietnam is a difficult question to answer. It depends very much. Okay, so let me tell you the story of Viet Thanh Nguyen's The Sympathizer.
Yes. Yeah.
One,
That's what I was thinking of. Yeah.
yes, so the book has been translated into so many different languages, right? And a Vietnamese book company bought the right to translate, and they finished the translation. It's beautiful, but there's no publisher there who has accepted to publish it yet. Because in Vietnam, there's an issue called censorship, and when it comes to political issues, politically related issues, they are very careful. So, I really hope to see the Vietnamese translation of The Sympathizer, and I'm really happy whenever a book by a writer like yourself is being published in Vietnam, because that's what I was talking about, reconciliation, right? People have to read each other's story from both sides, so yeah, with the Mountain Sing, I wrote this for Vietnamese people, so I really hope one day it can be published in Vietnam, and when the time comes, I would be the one who translated because I'm a translator myself, and I can envision how this novel will appear in Vietnamese.
Yeah. So do you think, are you worried that if your book gets translated, or if when it gets published, that it will also face issues of censorship? Like, do you think, like, what are the things that are in it that you think would be troublesome for the censors?
With censorship, it's so difficult to know, because there's no hard and fast rule about censorship in Vietnam. So they have general guidelines of things, that editor or publishers should not publish. But it's up to the editor and the publisher to inspect the content of a manuscript and say this is appropriate or not. So for example, Viet Thanh Nguyen's, the translation, The Refugees, was published in Vietnam, and they cut out the entire story, the war years, the
Wow.
translation of the war years, because the characters in the book were very anti-communist. So, but it's, so okay, so the censorship in Vietnam is very interesting, because when the publishing house gives the license, it's up to the editor and the director of the publishing house to decide what to keep in the book, right? And when the book is released to the market, then there's a unit within the Ministry of Information, Culture and Information, who will watch the market reaction. So if they heard like negative feedback, this is anti-government, then they will inspect the content, because they can't read everything. The censors, they don't read everything. They only read if they hear negative comments, and then they may withdraw the book from the market. So it happens very often. For example, one of the novels I love, called Mối Chú by Tạ Duy Anh, The Queen Termite, is about the current situation in Vietnam concerning corruption in land transactions and corruption in business sectors. And, it was published and it's brilliant, but then, they decided to withdraw it, because they said, this is it reflected the society in a in some very negative ways. So I think it very much depends on the perception of people. So it's really hard to say what is censored and which one is not. So I was hoping The Sympathizer, for example, could be published, but it hasn't been. So I'm trying to lobby some editors. Saying, come on, this is such a masterpiece. You need to publish it.
Right. And do you think that it would The Sympathizer or Mountain Sings ever exist in Vietnam, but just the English version? I mean, I guess it would be tricky because then people need to know English, right?
For an English book to be sold officially in bookshops, it has to be approved.
Gotcha.
So there's a unit within the Ministry of Culture and Information who has to approve these books for them to be sold openly in bookshops. So that's why there are quite some books which are copied. The books which are not allowed to be sold. I bought, for example, Dương Thu Hương. She wrote, Dương Thu Hương is very famous. She wrote The Paradise of the Blind, and she wrote one recent novel, and it, of course, is forbidden because she's not allowed to be published in Vietnam. So I went to a bookshop in Hanoi. So I heard that they sold it, right? So then I asked the owner, and she said, "Oh, we don't have it." And then I was browsing the bookstore and I bought like 5 or 6 books. So when I paid, she said, "Okay, you want that book by Dương Thu Hương? I'll take you upstairs." So we went up a cricket, like some deep staircase into a small dark room, and she handed me the book. So there's also tendency from Vietnamese authors like Nguyen Phan, who just published a brilliant book about the land reform called Kiến Chuột and Ruồi. So he couldn't publish it in Vietnam, so he ended up publishing it in California.
Wow.
By Viet publishers.
Yeah.
So yeah, so the situation is complicated in Vietnam.
Yeah. So can this is a very quick question. Was the detail about Hương reading, oh no, I guess it was grandma, reading Little House on the Prairie, Laura Ingalls Wilder. Is that a detail from your life?
No, I made that up. I made quite a few up in the book. But actually, it is inspired by the story of Larry Heineman, who wrote Paco Story.
Yeah.
So it's a brilliant book about the Vietnam War from the American point of view. So I translated Larry Heineman's essay into Vietnamese, and he said he spoke with a professor in Hanoi about how the Vietnamese and the Northern Vietnamese army could defeat the American army, who's so much more powerful, had more weapons. So this Professor Lien from Hanoi told Larry Heineman that he went to Russia and studied English, so he could read American literature to see into the American ways of thinking, so that he would go back to Vietnam and talk to the troops, talk to the Vietnamese Northern soldiers, and tell them about the Americans, so that they knew how to defeat them. So I was so moved about this story that I made up, this story of this professor who went to Russia and he translated this book to learn English.
Love it. Yeah. Do you want to take a look? I'll take a look at the questions and answer here. Let's see here. Okay, so there's a question about what reaction or reception have your respective families had to your books, if any? Quay Mai, do you want to answer? I've talked a little bit about my family, but I'm curious about what your family's reaction has been to your book.
So my parents actually don't read English. So they haven't been able to read the books yet. And, I hope one day I can translate it into Vietnamese so my parents could read it, because, they love everything I have written so far. So how about you? Your parents have read your book or not?
They have not. They, my mother, I think in English is, illiterate. So, or, functionally illiterate. I mean, my book is, not written for, for her sort of reading level. My father has not read it yet, or maybe he's in the process of reading it. I'm not sure. But so in my family, my aunts have read it, and so nobody's angry with me yet. And my brother has read it, and some cousins have read it. I think my younger cousins were really thankful um, that they felt like I had captured some bit of the truth about what it feels like to grow up in a place and not feel like you belong, right? And trying to figure out, how it is that you find your place in that world. Yeah, it's a very strange experience. Like the idea that I've never lived anywhere where Asian people are in the majority. Because I've always lived on the East Coast, and even in New York City, I mean, you can go to Chinatown and there are pockets where, sort of Asian people are the majority. But, I remember traveling to China a few years ago, and it was the first time that I was around, all Asian people all the time. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. It's just a very strange experience. And thinking about that. Okay, so there's, do you want me to read some more questions, Koi Mai, for you?
Yes.
All right. So someone has a question for you about the process, your writing process. So what was the process of writing for you, weaving people's everyday lives with larger social, political contexts? So what were the challenges, and did you do a lot of research?
So I think I researched for this book my whole life because as a child, I wanted to write a book that would give me a grandmother, because both of my grandmothers had died before I was born. And, growing up in both North and South Vietnam, I saw the destruction, the war caused on the people, both sides of the war. And I wanted to document that division inside a novel. So I had this idea. So when I started writing it, I did not know where the story would go. But every day I worked on it, and I used to be a documentary filmmaker. And a film producer used to tell me, you cannot make a good story, you cannot make a good film unless your hands tremble behind the camera. And I was really moved by the many things that Vietnamese people had gone through, moved by so many stories people have told me. So every day I felt compelled to work on it. And I remember there were so many nights. I have a lot of gray hair now because of this book, because there were times when 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, I could hear my characters calling me like, get up, we don't want our stories to be forgotten, so I was compelled to work on the book. Thank you so much for that question. I hope I answered.
This is great. And I think this is a question from my brother, who wants to know how you became a writer under censorship in Vietnam.
So actually, the answer of that question is inside the mountain scene. So Hương was inspired to be. So Lou is here.
Yeah.
I love you, Lou. I mean,
everybody loves Lou. I know.
So Lou is a lawyer now, right?
Lawyer.
Yeah. Amazing. You guys have done so well. Sorry, got distracted there. So she was, she was fearful about to become a writer, and she asked herself, could I have the courage to become a writer? And then there is the end of one chapter, and she said, after one of her uncles died, instead of crying, she took the notebook to the back of her house, and she wrote for her family members, because she had no choice but to write. And I, as a child, I always wanted to become a writer, but my parents told me no. But I think I did so many things, and I felt so happy among books. So then, after living for so many years, in the year 2006, I returned to Hanoi. Before that, I lived in Bangladesh. which was a very difficult country. And then I returned to Hanoi to live and work. And the joy of being home was so great. And I had my motorbike, not as big as your bike, Phuc, but it's, I had a Vespa.
Yeah.
So each morning I went to work on my motorbike, and I felt so wonderful, like a lot of the scenes of the flowers are inside the book. I was traveling under the red fruit flower, under the bang lang petals. So I felt such joy being home that, I started writing poetry. And I started with poetry in the year 2006 when I was 33 years old. I was old when I started writing. Thank you, Lou, for the question.
It's never too late. Do you think that do you feel like there is a implied tension between rural and urban life in your book?
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think in the rural area of Vietnam, there's still more traditions being practiced, and I mean, even nowadays there's a lot more singing. People talk a lot more in proverbs, and there's a lot more nature. And I wrote in the book, when humans fail us, nature can save us. And I mean, I'm devastated that Vietnam, the big cities are developing so fast at the expense of nature. There are few parks, and there's so much deforestation in Vietnam. It causes a lot of flood and disasters. Yeah. So yeah, just too much industrialization in Vietnam at the moment. So we need to ask Phuc some question.
Okay, there's a question for both of us here.
Okay.
Gregory wants to know what we're working on next. I have a couple of essays or articles that came out online and then in print. But I have notes. I'm taking notes on a couple of things, but I'm not quite sure yet. A lot of people have been asking me about whether I'm going to write a second memoir. I'm not sure if my life is so interesting that it warrants 2 memoirs.
I want to know about your life as an tattoo artist, and maybe have you been to Vietnam?
I have not. I would love to go.
I want to take you around to my favorite places. We have to go together. You have to go to Vietnam.
So my brother Lou has gone to Vietnam. I mean, everybody in my family has gone. I wanted to go with my parents, but my parents refused to go back. So I think I'm just
back since 75, 45 years.
Yeah, they have not been back. Yeah.
Lou, you should take your brother.
We'll go. I'll call you when we go. We can meet up.
I have suggestion of itinerary, what to do in the city.
So Quy Mai, what are you? Do you want to? I know it's bad luck to talk about your book, your next book. So if you want to.
So I finished my second novel. So for those who have bought my book, you can wait for the next novel, and I have sent it to my agent. So this book is based in the south of Vietnam. I wanted to do justice for Vietnam. So my first book was based in the north, and so this one is based in the south of Vietnam, and it's also about the long-lasting impact of the Vietnam War on its people. And this time I add American characters. I don't want to review it so much, but I think I'm really excited about this book, and I hope you will read it when it comes out.
Oh, I can't wait. That sounds amazing. Great. So we've been talking for a long time. So Quy Mai, thank you so much. It is, so just so you guys know, it's almost 10 o'clock in her time zone. It's coming up on 4 o'clock mine and 1 o'clock on the West Coast. So thank you to everybody who chimed in all across the world. And I can't recommend her book enough. It fills in such a huge gap that is missing in English literature about the Vietnam War, and it's just incredible. So thank you so much. It was such an honor, Quy Mai, to have you.
So before we go, I want to ask you how you came up with the name Saigon, because when I first, you know, when I first heard about the book Saigon, I thought, you know, it's about Saigon, the city. It's such a playful title.
Thanks. It's so Saigon, I think I wanted the title to capture a little bit of loss and sadness. You know, and also I wanted it to be a very real metaphor for my experience here, which is how it looks one way, but it sounds a different way. And so, yeah, so
Beautiful.
thanks.
I just want to say that this memoir is it's so important. It's important, and you know, I found such a good friend in the novel. I trusted Phuc's voice. You know, I trusted everything he told me because I felt honesty from every page. And I don't have any tattoo. So I'm thinking I would trust him enough to have a tattoo. And I mean, that would be the greatest trust I could give, you
Sure.
know, right?
Thank you very much.
So thank you so much, everyone, and Emily and Phuc for
Yeah,
having me.
thank you. And please, and so if you, both of our books are available from Green Apple Books. So, you know, before the pandemic, I was actually scheduled to be in San Francisco at a book event at Green Apple. And well, here we are, you know, in Maine and Germany and San Francisco. So thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. And yeah, have a great time. And we'll see you guys when we see you.
So I hope that everyone would take good care and stay safe. And Phuc and I will be on tour when this is over, so we can meet you and sign the book for you and hug you. Yes, because I love to hug my readers. I miss hugging people.
Me too. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Cảm ơn
Thank
chị.
you. Cảm ơn Phuc.